Okay, the last and final chapter of the textbook, chapter 14, deals with the idea of personal identity and how that affects us in the individual level and on a corporate level. So the objectives for this chapter are as follows. And so basically the definition of what defines meaningful work. And as you go through this section, I'd like you to establish, do you agree? Is that an adequate definition of what gives you a sense of fulfillment in terms of work and the idea of meaningful work? Gives you a little bit of a historical background in terms of some history of the relationship between work and identity, establishes the importance of that and the generally complex relationship. So first, this notion of meaningful work, and again, I ask you, do you agree with this? And it comes from this idea that work, particularly as an adult, is very integrated and integral to your concept and your self-esteem. When your book poses the question, when somebody asks, what do you do? They're specifically, generally focused on your employment, okay? And they look at 6 different elements of meaningful work. So the first, this idea of sense of agency, that has to do with control. Do you have any control at work? Do you have any influence over what you do or how you do it? That's that notion of agency. And that has a lot to do with whether or not you work to get something done or you work because the clock says you need to work. The second, beyond agency, is this idea of establishing a sense of connection, and that's the belonging and the relationships. If your work gives you opportunity to have relationships and to maintain those, that encourages a sense of connection, that more likely than not, that gives somebody a sense of fulfillment or meaning at work. Third, the opportunity for influence. Does your work allow you the opportunity to make a difference where what you do or what you say has an impact, a positive impact on people's lives? So basically, we believe that our work is meaningful when it affects not only the organization that we work for, but the other people involved in the work that we do. So that influence can be both upward or downward. Permits the use and development of talent. This is where the idea of personal growth. People love a job that continues to stimulate them and to push them and to expand them to be the best they can be. Not the same old rote behavior that you do in your sleep that's very boring and monotonous, and it doesn't stretch you at all. 5, offers us a sense of contribution to a greater good. We want our work to mean something. We want it to have some purpose, if you will. And so when a job allows you to do that, then you can gain meaning from it. And lastly, 6 was that it provides an adequate income. In today's relative or day and age, that term adequate might be a bit relative, but and it really needs to be because people have the different definitions. So do those 6 elements fit within your definition of what is a meaningful job? And ironically, when I take that personally, I absolutely love my job. I think teaching is one of the best jobs in the world. Love what I do for a number of different reasons. And when I look at these 6 components, all 6 are resounding yes for me, which is partly why I think I enjoy what I do so very much. Okay, in terms of some of the historical context on managing your work environment, so this notion of reflexive modernization is this idea that we seek to, let's go with a way to become it, that what we do with our job has a lot to do with the sense of who we are as a person. And that's when your book talks about ontological security, this notion here. You know, ontology is a state of being, a state of existence, and that connection between work and that sense. Okay. So obviously it's changed a lot over the last few decades and even certainly the last century. And much more of a shorter term workplace. In your grandfather's era, people probably kept the same job for 40, 50 years. Whereas nowadays there's a lot more of what we call a transient worker, where they will go more from one to one to one and job hop quite a bit. Okay. Uh, Then this notion of liquid versus light, solid versus heavy has a lot to do with capitalism and specifically looking at Ford, that particular corporation, and its influence on society at the time. Okay, short-term thinking and constant change has been argued to produce this notion of this erosion of character. And that's because consistently shifting, changing work situations make it difficult for people to build relationships in any kind of a stable environment, a stable life narrative that's based around such things as loyalty and corporate stability and so on and so forth. Some studies have been done talking about work identity and influence, and that's that notion of organizational control. And so many people propose that employees do not really work for an organization, but they're identity workers. They become the organization, and the organization becomes the person. And again, this notion, this other study that was been done, this idea of ascribed versus achieved, uh, in years past, who you were, who you would grow up to be, what you would do as a job, as a career, was very much determined by your birth. You're going to become a blacksmith because your father was a blacksmith, as his father was before him, and so on and so forth. So it's a lot about the family that you're born into. A lot of it has to do with the social status, social class that you were born into. That's ascribed. Achieved is you can be whatever you want to be. Go get the education and the skills that you need in order to be that, but it's your own. It's your own. You're the captain of your own ship, and you determine where you shall journey. So that's an interesting correlation and very much historically insightful. Okay, so that's explained. This notion of identity, identification, disidentification, elements of identity work are explained here in terms of the social, this very much a process in terms of how it's ongoing, how sometimes it's a struggle between this individual me kind of a view versus the larger organizational view, and very much dependent upon communication. In terms of identification, different types of work identity that people communicatively create, this idea of conformist, of being the entity, the organization, and buying into that. Okay. Okay, another notion is this idea of dramaturgical self, which is that we put on a certain behavior, we engage in a certain activity for the good of the company, and it's almost like putting on a show. A resistance is when you sort of you draw the line and you say no more, Mr. Corporate Manager, Mr. CEO, I'll take my paycheck, but I'm not going to sing and dance according to your tune. And there are different ways that resistance can take place and be exhibited, and certainly sarcasm can be one. That's where the discussion of culture jamming comes up as well as another way of doing it. And this no collar, no life view is an interesting view. It basically argues that the higher you climb the corporate ladder, the more you become consumed by it. And it's an interesting phenomenon. And then that continues to be explained. And then the book concludes with the fact that organizational identity is very important, especially in 21st century. and also makes the argument that this relationship is very volatile because work environment tends to be more unstable, and has a lot to do with our own self-individual. And so people have looked at, well, then how do we get stability? I mean, can we have the stability that they had in the Ford era? Can we get that back in this era? And there are arguments that discuss that. And certainly different definitions in terms of what it would take for that to happen. So all in all, a very interesting way to close out the book and close out the chapter. So congratulations, you have now finished the textbook, and we are winding down in this course. But that's it for chapter 4.